No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live, episode number 68. Please do subscribe to our brand new independent news source. Turn on the notification bell, and then you will be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Today, a Nigel Farage-led coalition of the right would pulverise Slippery Starmer's failing Labour government, which is less than 100 days into its shocking reign, a bombshell new poll has revealed. And it's hardly any wonder, is it, with MI5 today warning of the return of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State as terrorists continue to flood the channel as part of the invasion of the UK via our southern border.
Today we are powerfully alive to the risk that events in the Middle East directly trigger terrorist action in the UK, as we saw with last October's knife attack in Hartlepool. The ripples from conflict in that region will not necessarily arrive at our shores in a straightforward fashion. They'll be filtered through the lens of online media and mixed with existing views and grievances in unpredictable ways.
So given this is terrifying stuff, is it time for Farage to embrace mass deportations like Donald Trump in the US? I'll make the case in my digest and then get the verdict of my special guest, Conor Tomlinson of the Deprogrammed podcast, who made the case at the Reform UK conference. Also coming up today, is Katy Hopkins correct that the right has to unite to win? And actually, what does that mean for Nigel Farage and the Reform Party? Is it possible that they can bring figures like her into the fold?
All the effort right now is being expended with people beating each other up, competing for space, competing for the headline, falling out with each other, friction everywhere. It's not necessary. Take political power by 2029 in order to restore Britain.
And the Tory final three are revealed. But does Fishy Rishi's replacement, with wet Tom Tugendhat being booted as wet James cleverly surges, do they actually hold any relevance? And who will make the final two out of Kemi and Jenrick? Then in the uncancelled after show today, Angela Levin with all the latest royal news, including why Meghan Markle turned up uninvited to a red carpet event for publicity, and how Melania Trump has become pen pals with a member of the British royal family. We will tell you who. Register to watch on our own website, www.outspoken.live. You know that is a safe space, free of censorship. Your support, just £5 a month, gives you 30 minutes of extra content every single weekday, but allows me to continue doing this. And for that, I am incredibly grateful. Let's go. The UK is being subjected to an invasion, both illegally via the southern border and legally thanks to the Uni Party's greed for cheap labour without any thought about the fundamental damage and changes being wrought across Britain. Disturbing statistics to back up what some might think is a controversial statement are coming thick and fast. So check this out. Net migration has led to the fastest increase in the UK population since the 1970s. According to the Office for National Statistics, the population grew by 1% to 68.3 million in the year to mid-2023. And Britain now has the most illegals in Europe, with 1 in 100 of the population living here illegally. That's enough to fill the city of Leeds. So as I've been saying, for a very long time, these numbers are actually likely 4 times higher than the official estimates, as Katy Hopkins correctly outlines here.
It's alleged we have 745,000 of the illegals in our country. Of course, the real figure is 3 or 4 times that. 1,000 arrived officially yesterday, but of course, it's probably about quadruple that number. Now, I wrote a column in 2014 for The Sun called Stop the Boats. I was arrested for that and interviewed under caution. Really, I should have been given a peerage for being so ahead of my time.
So where are these millions of new arrivals going to live? What happens when they get sick? And sadly, given the types of people arriving, rapists, murderers, drug dealers, pimps, and most worryingly of all, terrorists, where do they get locked up? New data crunched by Matt Goodwin has shown that foreign nationals are up to twice as likely to be arrested on suspicion of committing crimes as Britons. 1 in 50 Albanians in the UK are in prison right now. But as Robert Jenrick put it at the Tory party conference, there is an institutional cover-up of the true scale of what's going on. And today's announcement by MI5 that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are on the rise again, with 75% of threats being Islamist and Iran behind at least 20 deadly plots here in the UK over the past 2 years. They've all been foiled, by the way. All of that shows why the flood of illegals is more dangerous than it's ever been.
Today we are powerfully alive to the risk that events in the Middle East directly trigger terrorist action in the UK, as we saw with last October's knife attack in Hartlepool. The ripples from conflict in that region will not necessarily arrive at our shores in a straightforward fashion. They'll be filtered through the lens of online media and mixed with existing views and grievances in unpredictable ways.
Sorry, it's just having a drink. Is international law keeping us safe? Like hell it is. Look at today's Daily Telegraph front page. It's astonishing, this story. Look at the headline. Albanian sneaks back into UK and ECHR decides he can stay. Legal loophole gives reprieve to thief who was let out of prison early, then breached order by quickly returning to Britain. Robert Jenrick wrote on X in response, the deported foreign criminal who snuck back into Britain is now allowed to stay because of his ECHR rights. Reform is a fantasy. We must leave. Let's settle our position now so we can unite, take the fight to Labour and get on to the other big issues facing our country. But the issue with that is it's Tory policy that got us here. Now, surprisingly, during his media round for his autobiography, it wasn't GB News which held Boris Johnson to account over mass immigration, but rather Sly News. This is a new interview. It's worth watching this part properly because Boris, for once, has nearly lost for words when presented with the facts before finally admitting, for the first time that I've heard this, by the way, that our immigration numbers under him were far too high.
We couldn't get anybody to stack the shelves, we couldn't get anybody to drive the fuel trucks, and so the Migration Advisory Committee decided that it'd be a good idea to have hang on, let me finish, because this is why immigration went up.
But forgive me, Mr. Johnson, interrupting, because the 3-year average before Brexit was 279,000 per year. The 3-year average since Brexit, since your point system was introduced, which is what the agency uses as its guide, 632,000. You can point to 1 year there where inflation had an effect in the middle, but not the overall averages. So again, I just step back and say, broadly speaking, immigration has gone up a lot since Brexit when people expected it to come down.
But we have it, the point is that we now, it went up because we were desperately short of labour. And I think in retrospect, it went up far too much, and that was a decision taken by the Migration Advisory Committee on the basis of all the advice they were getting. When it comes to stuff like the cross-channel, when it comes to the cross-channel illegal traffic, the ruthless abuse of people by the people traffic, Brexit allows you to do things like the Rwanda policy, which I think is a great shame that has now been abandoned by the current government in favour of a deal with Albania.
We shall see.
What's the difference in Albania and Rwanda?
The Rwanda plan you announced well before it was operational anyway.
You know I'm fond of Boris, but unfortunately he was referring there to illegal immigration. That's the only thing that the Rwanda plan is going to help with, or was going to help with. Then it comes to Labour. And let me tell you, their pledge to smash the gangs is a joke. Actually, this is a case of, have you seen those X posts where it's how it started, how it's going? Because Slippery Starmer celebrated on X not that long ago saying, we are smashing the criminal gangs. That's how it started, only to be followed by this piece of breaking news over the weekend.
The Home Office has put out new figures on the number of people arriving in the UK yesterday via small boats. and the number was 973 yesterday alone, arriving on 17 boats. Let me put that in context for you. On Friday, the 4th, there were 395 people arrived on 7 small boats. And then in the previous 4 days, no people, no small boats. There certainly seems to be a pattern in that as we get closer to weekends, the numbers ramp up. But just to reiterate, yesterday alone, 973 people arrived on small boats like these on your screen right now. A total of 17 boats arrived. Of course, we have been hearing this morning that 4 people died, 3 adults and a 2-year-old child during a couple of those attempted crossings.
Take everything on the whole of what I have said today, that the only solution is a new political force promising mass deportations like Trump in America to sort out what is now a catastrophe for the UK. But Nigel Farage and Reform UK have backed away from that policy, prompting Connor Tomlinson to write, "Why is Reform UK backing away from mass deportations?" Farage's latest statement seemed to be an unannounced departure from their election pledges. Any reluctance to deport the 1.2 million visa overstays since 1998, 135,000 illegal immigrants who have crossed the English Channel since 2018, and the 10,000 foreign criminals currently in Britain's prison is to refuse to uphold the rule of law. And what's interesting is that when Connor was asked at the recent Reform UK conference how Farage could increase its support, just listen to how the members reacted to his answer.
In one sentence, what do you want Reform to do that they're not doing now or not pushing now? One sentence.
You go first.
Mass deportations.
So there you have it. Very popular policy amongst Reform UK members. Look, the immigration hellscape, success of Labour and Conservative governments has, to use a Boris phrase, unleashed on Britain, can only be solved by bold policies like mass deportation. And now it's time for today's uncancelled interview. And we just saw him there today. I'm delighted to be joined by one of the smartest voices on the right. You will be hearing much more from this man in the years to come. He is the host of Tomlinson Talks on Lotus Eaters and the Deprogrammed podcast with the New Culture Forum, the brilliant Connor Tomlinson. So Connor, mass deportations, when you look at all of these statistics, it is surely a necessary policy for Nigel Farage to embrace, but he has done quite the opposite.
Well, hello. Good to see you again, Dan. Thank you for being so complimentary. Yes. I want to address something at the top of the show as well, which is the recent Oxford University study that said there are 745,000 people in the country that were here illegally, that it's 1 in 100. As I referenced in my tweet promoting that article, which was a write-up of the Reform Conference more generally, back in 2017, Pew Research ran the numbers, and they said a low estimate of 800,000 and a high estimate of 1.2 million people were here in the UK illegally. And this was because Tony Blair in 1998 had abolished exit checks, which meant that they didn't check who had left the country when their visa had expired. And this means that people had just stayed here far beyond their allowance of actually being here. Now, those with much lower net migration numbers, those with much less permissive migration rules, that was before, for example, Boris Johnson had repealed the insistence that students had to leave after a certain time after graduating. And 2017 is the year before they started recording the mass influx of what has now been 140,000 recorded people crossing the channel. So the idea that it's only 1 in 100, no, it's at least 1 in 50. And as Katy Hopkins mentioned, probably much more. So if the rule of law...
Do you agree with that, by the way? You agree that there are huge numbers that are just not tracked by the system?
Oh, that's obvious. I mean, not only did they not record all the channel crosses, the numbers have been estimated higher about 7 years ago. So I think this new study is wallpapering over the cracks. I think the number is way worse. It's at least 1 in 50. So that means, what, 2% of the population is here illegally? And that wouldn't shock me given the, exponential rise in useless Deliveroo drivers that have just been congregating outside every fast food establishment in local high streets. But something that's interesting is, okay, we know this figure, at least. Yes. If Reform UK want to be an insurgent political force, why have they not committed to a policy which is popular not only among their base at Reform Conference, but also the people who are doing their PR for them for free online, who are hoping for a viable populist patriotic party, and who read Reform's contract with the people, which read before the election, and I quote, "Deport foreign nationals immediately after their prison sentence ends, withdraw citizenship from immigrants who commit crime with the exception of some misdemeanor offences." Now, I would think committing widespread immigration fraud is not a misdemeanor offence. And given the scale of mass illegal immigration, that means that it's going to be at least 1.5 million people that are eligible for deportations there. So by Reform's own policy, they need mass deportations. Fortunately, it's popular in Europe and in the US with Trump's friend Nigel Farage. Farage's friend Donald Trump. So I can't understand why, unless a miscalculation of political expediency, like wanting to be liked by the BBC and Sky News, who, for the life of me, they're still giving interviews to, why Reform have backed off of this policy when everyone wants them to do it and it needs to be done?
And obviously you were at the Reform UK conference speaking there, and it went down very well in the room. What was interesting about that is Nigel, just a few days earlier, had backed away from the policy. Do you think, though, there's maybe just a difference in terms of the definition of what mass deportations actually means?
The reason I would say no is because my good friend Stephen Edgington, who does the Lord's work, maybe exempting his Liz Truss interview, in trying to hold these people to account, when Edgington followed up on whether or not this was just a matter of political expediency because the current legal mechanisms and the courts and hostile political class would move in concert against Reform and frustrate it, and it would be a logistical challenge. Farage said that he's not going to get dragged down the route of mass deportations. And then when he was pressed on it as to whether or not it's his ambition, regardless of logistical concerns, he said no. Now, mass deportations, clearly, by the scale of illegal immigration and by Reform's own stated policy, is necessary. And the definition, it's not like Stephen Edgington said, do you want to deport everyone here who came legally since 1945? Because I don't think anyone in the Reform camp is suggesting that. But by the virtue of them committing to dealing with illegal migration and deporting foreign criminals, that would mean a mass scale of deportations. And so it's just head-scratching, unless Farage has been given very bad advice, which, given the infighting within Reform, it's possible. It's a madness that he's backed off of this.
I do want to talk a lot about the political solution later in the show, but can we first kind of come to the very real threat to our safety and to the safety of our families? Because the MI5 press conference today was incredibly disturbing, actually disturbing on a lot of levels for me, because even though fundamentally they can't deny the statistics, which is that 75% of the threats they're investigating are Islamist, there's a growing threat from, I guess, resurgent ISIS and a resurgent Al-Qaeda, there was still a lot of odd language going on, a lot of trying to conflate the so-called extreme right with Islamist terrorists. I mean, I found all of that very bizarre. But if you put that to one side, the clear message was, we are back as a #1 terror target, and we have no idea who all of these terrorists are.
Well, a few years ago, the terror watch list figures were released, and they had, I think, 38,000 Islamist terror suspects on there, which was the equivalent to 1% of the entire Muslim population in the UK. And then the 2023 Prevent review, the same review which divulged that extreme right texts being monitored by the Home Office included Douglas Murray's The Strange Death of Europe, The Lord of the Rings, C.S. Lewis and Michael Portello's Great British Railway Journeys, which I'm sure is going to start a neo-Nazi putsch any day now. They are clearly hyper-focused on how to cast a wide enough net to ensnare all of their political opponents, while also running interference for the exact kind of Islamists that are going on to commit the most heinous terror attacks, which, if they were honest about the data, and I don't think they were even honest about it here, because they're measuring the wrong things, all of these things are preventable. I mean, remember, this isn't just coming in via the channel, as the Manchester Arena bomber did. I mean, he was given asylum, and I believe his parents' benefits even paid for the materials that he used to kill all those children, which is a fantastic bill landed with the British taxpayer. But also, legally, first and second generation migrants are being let into this country and committing crimes en masse. And every single one of those casualties is an avoidable tragedy that is on the government's hands. And what do they do with the knowledge of this? Well, as I've covered on my show before, and as I will be covering in an essay coming out soon, co-authored with the excellent Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Yes, she was on my show on Friday actually, and I've read the work that you're doing for her Substack. She's incredible, isn't she?
Oh, she's fantastic, and an example of, you know, someone who is actually both integrated and assimilated, and therefore knows the risks of the types of people that are being imported from her homeland of Islamified Somalia. In this larger article, I delve into Raiku. Now, for those who aren't familiar, and I spoke about this at the Reform Conference, which I was invited to as in my capacity of an independent journalist, by the way, because I'm not affiliated with the party. Raiku is the Home Office's Research, Information and Communications Unit. A lovely banal acronym. What they actually do is they prefabricate propaganda in advance of terror attacks, and anytime it happens, they run PR for the terrorists. During the London Bridge 2017 attack, they bust out 100 imams to read a pre-prepared statement condemning violence on the bridge for a photo op. During the Manchester Arena attack, Lucy Easthope, their disaster planner, wrote in The Guardian that she thinks it might have been a mistake to have the first message that the government put out to be one of love and resistance, meaning the "don't look back in anger" mantra that was delivered to the grieving parents of Manchester Arena was cooked up by the government themselves. They also went into overdrive during the COVID pandemic, as Laura Dodsworth has documented in her book A State of Fear. And very recently, I've become very suspicious when those 100 far-right rallies that were publicized in the press failed to materialize, but instead, Hope Not Hate's Rent-A-Mob, Hope Not Hate, by the way, received a grant from the Paul Hamlin Foundation to gather these kinds of local town organizing rent-a-mobs. They all showed up, they all got a big photo, and then newspapers of different ideological persuasions all ran on their front page how this purely organic group united to combat the far right. People should realize that all of these Islamic terrorists are being allowed into the country, the government knows about it, and when something purely predictable happens, which is the native British population are raped, abused, and murdered, the government takes your tax money and tells you don't be upset. So what Reform also need to do is not just commit to mass deportations, but a full and transparent investigation of everything the Home Office has been doing regarding immigration and their propaganda outlet for the last couple of decades. And if anyone has been found to engage in sufficient misconduct to warrant endangering the British public, they should face prison time for it.
Totally agree. And why I think there is so much political possibility in this is that we know where Labour stands, but there's this very good montage of some of Labour's biggest names, most popular faces on the left, openly advocating against deportation of criminals in recent years. Have a look at this.
Does the Minister accept that many people feel that this mass deportation is both cruel and potentially dangerous? Cruel because he is separating families of people who have served their sentence, separating families just weeks from Christmas, and possibly dangerous because he is deporting vulnerable people, communities we know are particularly vulnerable to coronavirus, in the middle of a pandemic.
The process of mass deportation, which is fundamentally wrong. It's notorious for bundling people out of the country without due process. Does the Minister recognise that this decision effectively amounts to double jeopardy when those with some lesser offences have already served their custodial sentence? And does he recognised that the message that it sends about the consequences of being a white offender or being a black offender, given the racial disparities in sentencing. I hope the Minister agrees that no one is above the law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Government plans to push ahead with the mass deportation of 50 people to Jamaica this week are both obscene and irresponsible and fly in the face of the damning EHRC report released only last week, which declared the hostile environment.
Oh, those poor little criminals having to go back to Jamaica, Connor. So this is why there's so much political scope in this.
Yeah, I'll take Diane Abbott's advice on literally anything when she understands how webcams or shoes work. Also, if I remember correctly, the woman speaking last is Kim Johnson, who claims to be the first black MP for Liverpool. She doesn't quite pass, I'll put it that way. Look, I'm happy to deport every single Albanian criminal. You know, there's 1 in 50, at least estimated, remember, because the Telegraph did excellent work compiling that data, but they had to painstakingly stitch it together rather than just have it given to them by the Ministry of Justice, as happens in other first world countries. I'm happy for all those Albanians to be deported well before they serve their custodial sentence, because any time a foreign criminal breaks into Britain, and bear in mind, we are number 1 in Western Europe, and I think second in all of Europe for crimes committed by foreign nationals in 2023. Anytime a foreign national commits a crime in Britain, they are not only legally, when they're here, often a detriment to the taxpayer, costing about £150,000 by the time they reach 66. But also, we have to pay for their bed and board. We don't even do that for military servicemen who are sleeping derelict on the streets after they return from frontline conflict. So the idea that we should be putting up violent rapists, for example, the 7 men that were just prosecuted in that 9-week-long grooming gang trial that only Charlie Peters showed up to cover because every single other mainstream establishment is an apologetic for the regime that imported them here. Every time we put up those foreign criminals, we are just inflicting another wound on the law-abiding, tax-paying population of Britain and the families of those aggrieved. I think that we should, for any criminal who has dual nationality or is a foreign national or broke into the country illegally, deport them immediately before they even serve their sentence. And also, I think for those who are second generation, and therefore they are homegrown extremists, murderers, like the Adebolajo brothers who committed the Lee Rigby murder. I think returning the death penalty for cases like that would probably be very suitable. It seems, though, that no matter what crime is committed, be it rape or even murder, as one of the criminals, the flight that Dawn Butler, Keir Starmer, and 150 other Labour MPs ended up grounding, destined for Jamaica. One of them went on to commit murder. It seems that no crime actually matters for them. It's just whether or not the complexion of the criminal is a darker shade than milk. And frankly, because I'm not a demented racist, I think the actions of a person matter a lot more than their skin colour. And so I think we should punish criminals accordingly.
Amen. Amen. Now, breaking right now, a Bombshell More in Common poll shows the support for Slippery Starmer's failed government plummeting just 100 days since his election. Labour on 29%, the Tories 18%. The Tories 28%, Reform 19%, Lib Dems 11%, Green 7%, SNP 2%. Of course, let's be honest, the real surger here is Nigel Farage, and World by Wolf posted on X a Tory Reform merger would win a massive landslide and provide a mandate for radical change. Combined, they're at 47% in the polls. Do a deal, unite the right, transform Britain. Now, this is a position that Katy Hopkins has been increasingly advocating for, despite the fact she said that she was banned from Reform Party conference. Watch this.
What needs to happen is there needs to be a unifying strategy, and not wishing to hark back to my old world of delivering mission command inside of FTSE 100 companies, but the clear mission that would unify this effort across all these different players, all of whom I respect in different ways, to take political power by 2029 in order to restore Britain. That one line would unify all the effort that's currently being expended in a competitive way, right? All the effort right now is being expended with people beating each other up, competing for space, competing for the headline, falling out with each other, friction everywhere. It's not necessary. Take political power by 2029 in order to restore Britain.
Now, Connor, I actually have a lot of respect for the position that Katy Hopkins is taking on this, because it's very different to Tommy Robinson or Father Calvin Robinson, who's here tomorrow. She genuinely does seem to believe in the need to unite behind the right, and Farage is the best option politically. Do you agree?
So I don't know Katie, but I will say it is almost humorously ironic that she's chosen the word restoration, because without saying who is working with the Generic campaign, I happen to know that that has been the word banded most around the office, and hence why Generic has been inspired to, as it was put in The Spectator, use the demeanour of David Cameron to sell the policies of Nigel Farage. And I think that will, unless there's a major upset tomorrow, probably serve him well in getting to the final two. Again, I don't know Katie, other than, you know, I'm quite a young man and she's been on the telly pretty much all my life. She seems perfectly nice. It won't happen. And I don't want to upset anyone who is either a fan of Katie or a fan of Nigel. But there is a zero engagement policy basically on behalf of reform with certain individuals, and that seems unshakable purely on personalities alone. It doesn't frankly matter whether or not the case can be made to them that these are your voters, they're turning out in their hundreds of thousands in a perfectly peaceful street march. It is just radioactive to them on what I can only define as a vibes basis. Quick story on that. So I obviously wasn't banned from Reform Conference, though I think after my clip did the rounds, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens next time. But I did speak to their new press officer, because what I wanted to do is I wanted to secure permission to film there, and people can see the adventures that I went on the first day of the conference on Tomlinson Talks from last week on lotusseats.com. But in order to secure that, I had chats with a few people behind Reform, and the general consensus was that I'm okay. I'm brand safe. I've never done anything to upset the Reform higher-ups. I've got MPs that follow me, and, you know, I've chatted to James McMurdoch and Richard and they're very nice chaps. However, because of some of the things that my co-host said and did, such as getting deselected as Reform candidates and being very vocal about it on Twitter since, there could be basically no affiliation with the Lotus Eaters as a broader brand while I was there. I just had to be there as me. And obviously I do other things, so that was okay. So even though I and the other Lotus Eaters voted for them, even though many of the Lotus Eaters who did not have any sort of offending articles against Reform make lots of criticisms in good spirits and hope that Reform can get off the ground and be the party that we all want and need, as Katy Hopkins has said, they are also being punished. And so there is currently, I think, an unwillingness to engage with freely available, sympathetic media outlets, free researchers, people that will put things like all that Raikou stuff I just said on Reform's priority list to deal with on day one so they don't get tripped up by the civil service, based on the fact that there's a kind of mistrust there. Based on the fact that I think some in Reform are slightly older and don't really know how the internet works, and based on some personality clashes. And call me pessimistic, but for the time being, I don't see those things being resolved. But I do agree that they desperately need to be resolved, because we do not have even 5 years to screw around because of just, as I've stated, with the illegal immigration situation, but also the financial situation, the way that the world is moving in terms of global conflicts and the centralization of power in international institutions. We are staring down the gun barrel of demographic, cultural, political obsolescence, and we really need Reform to, or at least something in its place, to get its act together and start engaging with the people that are interested in restoring this country.
Look, I have a huge amount of sympathy for Reform UK, because you have seen how the mainstream media hunt them down, and they are held to a completely different standard to any other political party. So, for example, in the pre-election period, you literally had Green Party candidates advocating for jihad, and that got hardly any coverage compared to a Reform UK candidate who maybe 10, 15 years ago had said something vaguely supportive of Tommy Robinson. So I do understand they've got a mainstream media issue. And on the whole, I think Reform UK are playing it sensibly and are taking things slowly. And that's why I do cut them a lot of slack. But like you, Connor, I say I'm a critical friend, and on an issue like mass deportation today, I say, no, you've got to come around to this policy, and hopefully they will. But the risk is that they are outflanked on the right. And I want to show you what went on at the UKIP party conference over the weekend, because UKIP are saying, Katy Hopkins, come on in. Tommy Robinson, come on in. They've signed Father Calvin Robinson as their chief spokesperson, and their leader, a guy called Nick Tenchoni, who I've had on the show before, is taking a really full-throttled approach. And I think the way that he deals with these left-wing zealots outside of the conference will garner him a lot of fans. So let's have a look at this, Connor, and then you can react off the back.
Who gave you permission to come to my conference? Who gave you permission to try and subvert democracy? The left in Britain, as usual. The far left in Britain. Every time they hate democracy, they are totalitarian. They are far left nutcases. They are not allowed here. They are not allowed here, and they are not welcome in Britain.
Connor, your response.
They really are the most hideous freaks, aren't they? I mean, look, I've met and had dinner with Nick and that before. He's a very nice chap. I think the issue with UKIP is that they are a contaminated brand ever since Farage left, and certain people mismanaged it. I like Nick very much. He's a committed Christian. He's a very honest man. I think UKIP would need a significant facelift and possibly even a rebrand to the Restoration Party if it wants to regain some of the lost political momentum that it's had over the last few years. And the other thing as well, and again, I don't wish to disparage anyone, but I think people need to know their roles. And I say this as never wanting to be an MP. You can hold me to this. I don't want to do it. I know what people are like in Parliament. I don't even drink anymore, man. I just don't want to do it, right? I think that it's worthwhile having spokespeople. It's worthwhile having researchers. It's worthwhile having people that can be able to galvanize and create a crowd, right? Again, I don't know Tommy Robinson from Adam. I've met him once. He was very polite. We just said hello. But all of his rallies have seemed perfectly cheerful, and there's been absolutely no violence, unlike the brutal Notting Hill Carnival, which is celebrated as a festival of diversity every year. And so, do I think Tommy Robinson should be placed in charge of a government department? No. Do I think that that's where he'd be best used? No. Is it fine to have him as a supporter? I think yes. Does it actually behoove movements like Reform constantly making him the boogeyman to try and make you look more palatable to a mainstream media who, frankly, would rather see Farage die in that plane crash than become the Prime Minister? I think it's a terrible idea because it only estranges your core supporters and doesn't actually attract many new people over. And I think what Nick Tenchoni is actually doing pretty sensibly, that Reform should be doing, and this is something one of our mutual friends has also cottoned on to after them being bashed by the media repeatedly and having no truck with it, is why are you even engaging with the likes of the BBC and Sky? At Reform Conference, I can tell you now, all of the interviews had to go through the press office, and I tried to queue it up, and some of the MPs were just busy, and some of the emails got lost in the chain because, again, they're building the plane as it flies. But they found the time to dedicate interviews to, of course, GB News, but also Sky. Why are you chatting to Darren McCaffrey?
Playing the mainstream media game. I couldn't agree more. Look at what Trump did. He blew up the system. Farage needs to look much more closely at what Trump did in the US, because that media ecosystem is never going to see you get into power. Quite the opposite. And the great thing is, in America, certainly in Republican circles, they're destroyed. They're a busted flush. And actually, where is the power in that party? The power in that party, and obviously, I don't say this, Connor, by the way, just from a personal perspective, but the power in that party is now in the independent media. Tucker Carlson, Dan Bongino, Russell Brand, they were the people who were sitting alongside Trump at the Republican Party conference. And there's many more too, of course, Stephen Crowder and the likes. But Farage's strategy is interesting because he used his party political broadcast last night to do something really innovative. And it's very clear He wants to take the position of the Conservative Party is relevant. We're the official opposition and we are coming for Labour. So this was a political party broadcast like we've never seen in the UK before. Watch.
From the people that sold the gold, we bring you Labour's Britain. Featuring shivering grandparents with no winter fuel allowance, free clothing, glasses, accommodation, and tickets, as long as you're a Labour MP. Over 11,000 illegal migrant crossings and counting. And trade unions getting every pay rise they ever asked for, whilst taxes rise for everyone else. Labour's Britain, starring Free Gear Keir, Robbing Rachel, Red Ed, and Well-Dressed Angela. Produced by Lord Ali, in association with the trade unions. Labour's Britain.
Do you like Connor?
No. And the reason I don't is because it doesn't speak to me. What actually that does is much like what the Reform Conference did. It consolidates its over 50 vote. And that's fine. That's good. Given the age of the Conservative Party voter on average at the last election was 63, there are going to be a lot of disaffected Tories and Labour voters who are up for grabs for reform at the next election. That's excellent. But it doesn't strike a tone of the youthful exuberance that the party should be attracting, because reform was joint first with Labour among young men, and all of the parties promising mass deportations on the continent, the Freedom Party in Austria, the AfD in Germany, the Swedish Democrats, Front National in France, they are leading among young people, and they are gaining ground despite the very obstructive European EU parliamentary system and national systems, where all of the left-wing and so-called centrist parties are allying against them. Well, they're just winning outright majorities because the youngest people are the least likely to be concerned that the mainstream media are calling something racist, because they're not watching the mainstream media. And for all of our lives, everything has been racist. So the boys cried wolf too many times. So reform should be speaking to them as well as their over 50s audience. What Trump is doing is that strategy. He's doing a high-low strategy. The high strategy is his rallies. It gets the broadest possible coalition. He has blacks and Latinos for Trump there. Everyone's dancing along to cheesy music like YMCA, Trump himself included. It's a great and jubilant atmosphere. But you don't see a lot of really young people there. What you do see when he goes to a college campus is all of the young frat guys really like Trump. And it's because he's been on Theo Von's podcast. It's because all of the new Democrats that have coalesced around him have been friends of Joe Rogan. It's because he's the topic of many memes. And look, Farage did a little bit of that with TikTok, but refusing to engage with dissident media outlets or actively alienating the inventive anonymous Twitter accounts who are pushing for more immigration restriction, who can make some really inventive marketing materials that caters to my generation, will lose you that constituency who is up for grabs. And that constituency, by the way, is the sizable share of the sofa voter. This is something that the Policy Exchange released a report on a few months ago now. It's that 4.8 million voters will be up for grabs, especially in the north at the next election. And the sofa voter is not most likely to be a boomer. They are most likely to be young, northern, non-university graduates. And lots of them will be amenable to reform as long as you get the message out there. And the thing is, they aren't watching Ofcom regulated broadcast media. And funnily enough, increasingly, neither of the boomers, because lots of people are cancelling the TV license fees. So you really have to engage with non-Ofcom regulated, sympathetic, long-form podcasts and media shows like yours and mine, Dan. And what needs to be done there is there needs to be a trust established. Because at the moment, this is the final thing I'll say, what I'm seeing from reform is that some among reform are trying to astroturf their own activist faces. There are some people who have gained a massive following in the last few days on Twitter, who are on reform's payroll. And they have not been able to gain an organic audience on their own. They post banal things. They don't do their own research. And whereas there are, let's say, popular voices among my generation who are more than happy to give reform a sympathetic ear, there is no trust established there. What reform need to do is they need to reach out and see what audience they can cultivate, whether that's among the Hopkins crowd, whether that's among the likes of you and me, rather than try and manufacture their own people, because it just won't work.
No, indeed. And also, just don't play within a system that wants to destroy you, which is currently what they're doing. But I still have a bit of faith I'm going to give them a bit of time. That's where I stand on it. Critical friend, because I still believe that Farage is our best hope to be Prime Minister in 2029, and it's incredibly, incredibly important. But look, breaking right now, Tom Tugendhat, the ultra wet, is out. But all of a sudden, the mainstream media are getting very, very excited about the idea that James Cleverly, a major wet who just gave away, or at least started the process of giving away the Jos Islands, could become the Conservative Party leader over either Robert Jenrick or Kemi Badenoch. They are delusional, but have a look at Sly News going crazy for this result.
Third ballot in the leadership contest. 120 votes were cast, and the votes for each candidate were as follows. Kemi Badenoch, 30. James Cleverly, 39. Robert Jenrick, 31. And Tom Tugendhat, 20. So as a result of that ballot, Tom Tugendhat is eliminated from the contest. And the next ballot, the fourth ballot, will take place tomorrow between 1:30 and 3 p.m. in this space, between the top three candidates of Kemi Badenoch, James Cleverly and Robert Jenrick. The result will be announced tomorrow at 3:30. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Just hold that open for a second, can you?
Wow, I have to say I did an intake of breath at that result, because things have been completely flipped on their heads with that round of voting. James Cleverly topping the ballot there with 39 votes. Robert Jenrick, who of course had such clear blue water between him and the other rivals previously, is down on 31. Kemi Badenoch on 30, and Tom Tugendhat, who is eliminated from the contest, on 20 votes. Blimey, I think that just shows how conference has changed everything. It's that all-important word, momentum, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is a sensational result that has thrown the contest into a new perspective. Tom Tugendhat goes out, as predicted, on 20 votes.
You can have that one.
Thank you very much, Sophie. One less vote than last time.
But Connor, it hasn't, has it? It hasn't, because there are two right-wing candidates who remain in the race. Tomorrow it will be Cleverly versus either Robert Jenrick, my preference, I think your preference too, or Kemi Badenoch, and Badenoch and or Jenrick go on to win with the membership.
Yeah, I'm exceptionally skeptic of calling Kemi Badenoch right-wing, considering she uses anti-white identity politics when it suits.
Me too. You cannot trust her, but you know what I'm saying. She is garnering support from the right of the party.
Yes, the perception. I think you're going to see a split between Tugendhat's voters, some who fold in behind Kemi because CCHQ tells them to, and some who fold in behind Cleverly, inappropriately named, because he is the closest aligned to the One Nation wing that Tugendhat comes from. Now, of course, Tugendhat was never going to get very far because he never had much organic support, despite him saying that he was the most popular among young conservatives in the party. Yeah, that tends to happen when you purge the popular voices like me from the party ahead of the leadership election. And then he decided, I mean, the One Nation group, again, very obstinate, he decided to say Nigel Farage is dangerous and irresponsible during the Southport massacre civil unrest for supposedly spreading false information about the attacker, which Farage didn't. And so the party, the majority of members polled by Popcon said they wanted a reform merger, if not at least closer ties working with the two. So the idea that if you put Tugendhat to a membership, he would win is ludicrous. But what's happening here is that the MPs are giving the members a Hobson's choice. So Jenrick, again, yes, he's certainly my pick. I think that I've joked that he's a recent convert to the blindingly obvious, but I do think he's sincere, actually. I think part of his sincerity comes from the fact that his wife is an Israeli American, and in the aftermath of October the 7th, he sees these barbarians gathering in the street every weekend and Wednesday outside Westminster who would happily massacre his family. And so, of course, much like Suella Braverman, this cause hits very much home for him. And he's poured over the data with the likes of Neil O'Brien and Nick Timothy, and has published lots of papers on the costs of mass migration, and he's done a lot of good work in the last few years and is now sounding even stronger than Nigel Farage on mass deportations, punishing nations who won't take back their foreign criminals with visa penalties and even tariffs like Trump, and on English identity, not British values. Because remember, values are particular to a people, and so you can't have the values without the people still being the predominant host majority, and Jemrick understands all of this. But if we get a choice, I say we, I can't vote anymore, if Conservative members get a choice between Kemi Badenoch and James Cleverly, well, you've robbed the membership of, frankly, the most viable candidate they would like to see, and also the potential to merge with Reform, much to the chagrin of the remaining rump of Lib Dem light Tory candidates in the future. I will say one more thing as well, and I hope this doesn't get me in trouble. Keep eyes on Twitter for the next 24 hours in case something about Cleverly does drop, because everyone with their ears to the ground hears things in Westminster. And like many people, Cleverly may not have always been squeaky clean. And that is not necessarily known yet. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone's lips loosen, because that tends to happen with the porous barrier between parliamentary spads and journalists who will like a drink in the same members' clubs. I wouldn't be shocked if that comes out in the next few hours. But frankly, it doesn't matter how good his speech was at conference. The members don't like him because his record on immigration was as bad as Priti Patel's. Most people don't like Kemi either unless they've read that one Conservative Home article a few years ago and haven't read Nadine Dorries' stuff. Most people in the Conservative Party would want Jemrick, and if they don't get to vote for him, I think it's frankly a rigged election.
Yep. Totally. Now, the thing is with Cleverly as well, we have to speak about the Jos Island situation because he was part of this capitulation, and he posted about it on X saying weak, and Labour lied, etc., etc. But, you know, the community note on X, I think, is worth just reading, Connor, because it says, James Cleverly announced the opening of negotiations with Mauritius to return the Chagos Islands whilst Foreign Secretary in 2022. At the time, he said he hoped the deal would be finalised in 2023. So come on, this is a deal which is so unpopular with Conservative Party members. He's done, isn't he? He's completely finished. That should be a disqualifying factor on its own.
One would presume so. So perhaps the goal is to get him up against Kemi Badenoch in the members' vote. Therefore, they get Kemi by default, and Dougie Smith gets his preferred candidate. The interesting thing about this deal, as well as my colleagues Josh and Dan went over on the Lotus Eaters show yesterday, is that Britain has a military base here. And by giving it back over to the neighbouring nation, they are quite closely tied with China. So absolutely nothing prevents the Chinese generals being walked around near the military base to have a bit of a snoop. Given the Chinese are one of our most prominent enemies, us giving over this secure location and actually paying, if I remember, it's Mauritius, paying them to take it back. So we will actually be paying them reparations for an island that they never technically even owned because the nation wasn't set up by the time that the British claimed ownership to it. To then have our enemies snoop around our military bases, yeah, it's demented. And it just simply shows that, frankly, the sort of UN decolonization excuse that's been given here, as well as possible Chinese interest having captured a fair portion of our politics, is more predominant than, frankly, national loyalty. Because if it were me, if any of my government ministers were cutting up and selling part of Britain's proud imperial legacy, they would be sacked on the spot.
Yeah, well, look, I don't trust everything Dominick Cummings says, right? But he was very clear on X earlier today that the option of this deal came across his desk when he was working for Boris Johnson, chief advisor to Boris Johnson, and he told them to F off. And fundamentally, Cleverly, he believes, has been a useful idiot to the Civil Service and to the establishment in terms of helping grease the wheels for this deal. So look, I actually do think Cleverly is a nice man, but he is not the answer to what the Conservative Party needs. And it's going to be interesting, actually, Connor, to see if any of those rumours you're referring to do drop. But look, stand by, Connor Tomlinson, because we're back in just 1 minute. I want to show you the UK's humiliation as Elon Musk, in a new interview with Tucker Carlson, which you just have to see, does the most perfect takedown of the madness of the past 100 days under Keir Starmer. But first, Everyday subtle changes occur in our bodies, often going unnoticed. It's called inflammaging, a chronic low-grade inflammation that deteriorates our health as we get older. And it's more than just a sign of aging, it's a key contributor to health issues like cardiovascular diseases, dementia and depression, and physical decline. It continuously weakens the body's resilience, turning minor infections severe and impacting mental health and cognitive function. Inflammaging significantly diminishes both quality of life and independence. Now, proper diet, exercise, and sleep, while very important, can only get you so far. So that's why I take Clean Being by Verso. It contains ingredients targeted to fight off and help prevent inflammaging. Research shows that these ingredients clean out damaged cells in the body that affect healthy cells, reduce inflammation, protect against oxidative stress, and improve conditions like cardiovascular diseases and neurological disorders. After taking Clean Bean for some time, for me personally, I've noticed less joint pain, increased energy, better mood, and even clearer skin. I can think better, I don't get sick as often. These are all benefits of reducing inflammation. Plus, Verso ensures transparency by producing and publishing third-party testing results for each batch, so you know exactly what you're getting and that what you're getting is what you paid for. So click the link in the description here on YouTube or on Rumble, or head over to buy.ver.so and use the coupon code Outspoken at checkout to save 15% on your first order. That's buy.ver.so/Outspoken. Use the coupon code Outspoken. But now back to the show, and an astonishing takedown of the UK under Slippery Starmer has been delivered by Elon Musk to Tucker Carlson. And to be honest, this makes me feel ashamed and embarrassed to be living in Starmer's Britain. Watch this.
There's also like a shocking amount of censorship. You may have seen like in Britain, they're, I kid you not, how can this be real? They are releasing convicted pedophiles from prison in order to put people in prison for Facebook posts.
But to be fair, those are posts that criticize the government, so they have a good reason.
Well, they would actually, some of these posts that at least the ones I've seen, didn't actually criticize the government. or they were seen as sort of as hate speech.
Right.
So
because they noticed the society getting crappier and crappier with every year, and they said so.
Yeah. I mean, there were, and I'm simply stating a fact, there were migrant rape gangs in England that would run around and prey on young girls, gang rape them, and some people found that objectionable, which obviously it should be objectionable, and they were upset about that, and so they complained about it online and were sent to prison.
I mean, Connor Tomlinson, isn't it extraordinary that there's so little discussion in the British mainstream media about what's happened over the past 100 days, yet there is Elon Musk with Tucker Carlson sort of pointing out the madness to the world?
I mean, I would say it was extraordinary if I was surprised, Dan. I think Musk, being the world's richest man and second most famous man after the person who recently appeared on stage with Donald Trump, is in the perfect position to call out these particular issues. And also, speaking as a fellow autist, I think he just has a sort of gut level aversion to bullshit, if I might say. And so he's just going to say it as he thinks, not caring about whether or not Mark Rowley issues an empty threat to extradite him. I'm not shocked, though, that there isn't much of a discussion on this, because any time that, for example, a figure like Axel Ruder Cabana goes in and murders a bunch of innocent children, or thousands of girls, I think it was 4,000 victims were identified by Suella Braverman and the Sunak government's task force on the grooming gangs were systematically raped by at least 1,500 identified perpetrators. Anytime this comes up, this is an indictment of the establishment, the government, the civil service, the media class's preferred policies. This is basically a recognition that no, we're not all blank slates. No, as soon as you enter through Heathrow or Gatwick's arrival lounge, that you aren't showered in British values and become as British as you and me. And yet they keep insisting on this being true because they believe themselves to be the administrators of a utopia. And because they are so intellectually insecure and also feel very financially insecure, unless Lord Ali's giving them donations, but they'd like to keep their jobs, they just have to keep insisting that what they're doing is working, even if thousands of people are suffering in terror attacks or at the hands of grooming gangs or at the hands of machete gangs that are blighting Southend quite often. We don't have to live like this. But if they admit fault by showcasing these stories, if they admit that it's not just a man of no fixed abode doing these crimes quite predictably, disproportionately, if, like in the case of Thomas Roberts, the poor aspiring Marine who was murdered by an Afghan illegal migrant who lied about his age and had already killed 2 people in Serbia, was wanted for murder, known to Interpol, if they admit that there were, quote, systemic failures there, which they clearly were, then that means that according to Article 2 of their beloved EHRC, they're failing according to the dictate of what government's meant to do, which is protect its own people from foreign avoidable threats. And so the moment they platform these stories, their entire legitimacy, their mandate to govern falls apart. And so they have to keep up a conspiracy of silence. And this is why they want to bring forth legislation which bans X on the grounds of misinformation. This is why they're probably going to levy Ofcom regulations to online broadcasts like yours or mine, because they can't have people pointing out the blindingly obvious to them, because the moment that people realize the emperor has no clothes, not only do they stop supporting them, not only do they get angry, but they also realize all of that has been inflicted upon us for the last few decades was completely avoidable and that they wanted it to happen. And there will be a very upset population who decide to, let's say, invest in whatever viable political solution that might want to come along anytime soon now. They will be inclined to support that. And they can't have that according to the uniparty system.
Oh my goodness, indeed. It is utterly chilling. Well, look, while we still do have our free speech online, Connor, what do you have planned for Tomlinson Talks tomorrow on Lotus Eaters?
Oh, tomorrow I'm going to be doing an extensive anatomy to warn my friends in America how the banks can bring down a government. I'm going to do essentially a 90-minute dissection on exactly how Liz Truss was cooed out, because I haven't seen anyone put it together in quite a forensic fashion. I've got things coming up in the coming weeks, got lots of essays for Ryan Hersey Ali, more episodes pre-recorded for Deprogrammed, and you can just find me spewing a bunch of nonsense on X at @con_Tomlinson.
Oh, Connor, you're absolutely brilliant. I will definitely be checking that out tomorrow. Tomlinson Talks on Lotus Eaters. And thank you so much for being back here on Outspoken today.
Pleasure, Dan, as always.
Now, coming up in the uncancelled after show, Angela Levin with all the latest royal news, including why Meghan Markle turned up uninvited to that red carpet event for publicity, and also how Melania Trump, this is really crazy, sweet though, has become pen pals with a member of the British royal family. Angela is going to reveal who. We've got so much more to cover as well. You know, it's important to me that we have a safe space that isn't patrolled by big tech for all of the reasons that Connor was just talking about. So that's why we have www.outspoken.live, our membership section. You get half an hour of extra content every single day. So we come off big tech platforms, we move to our own to continue the conversation in the uncancelled after show. All you have to do is register to watch at www.outspoken.live. Back tomorrow, 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Calvin Robinson, Father Calvin Robinson, back in the UK and back in the house tomorrow. So I'm very excited about that. Hit subscribe right now on YouTube and Rumble to be alerted to all of our new videos. Most importantly, promise to keep fighting for you, but don't go anywhere, because join us on the after show with Angela Levin in just one moment.